It's time once again for another episode of Atlanta Legal Experts Radio, broadcasting live from the Pro Business Channel studios in Atlanta. And now, here's your host, Emily-Rowell.
Good morning and welcome to another great episode of Atlanta Legal Experts Radio. I am your host, Emily-Rowell with Peachtree Offices. I have Craig Williams here with me today, my co-host.
Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you for your assistance. I also have Rich-Casanova. They are both with Pro Business Channel.
Here. I always feel like it's attendance call, roll call here.
Yes, are you here today?
Yeah, and looking forward to a great show. You got a great lineup of guests and subject matter experts.
Me too. So this morning I have Nancy Prager. Good morning.
Good morning.
She's with Prager Law, and you will be talking about
business law and intellectual property.
Okay, thank you so much. I also have Michael Bixson with the Bixson Law Firm. I'm wonderful. Thank you for being here bright and early. And you'll be discussing?
Criminal defense.
Okay, great. We can't wait to hear about that. And last but not least, we have Joy Farrell with the Farrell Law Firm. Good morning.
Good morning.
And what will we be talking about today?
We will be discussing family law issues, custody, child support, divorce, and things like that.
Thank you so much for joining us. And our sponsors today are 3A Law Practice Management, helping attorneys start and grow their practice, and Peachtree Offices, helping attorneys establish their business all throughout the Atlanta area. And we have Atlanta's own John Marshall Law School, and you can see all of their information on our website on atlantalegalexperts.com. So without further ado...
What is ado, by the way? Yeah. Is that French for I can't wait for this show?
Exactly.
Or further, I don't. I do or I don't.
Yeah, you are on a roll today all of a sudden.
Yeah,
we haven't even started
a rabbit trail.
So we have Nancy Prager with us this morning. She is a recent transplant from D.C. to Atlanta. She is an accomplished attorney as well as an experienced entrepreneur. Say that 5 times fast, especially at 8 o'clock in the morning. In 2010, after many different experiences, she decided to focus on her legal practice. She provides strategic legal services to clients in industries ranging from entertainment to technology. Nancy also serves as counsel to a variety of agencies, including social media, marketing, and video production firms. Her clients benefit from the breadth of her experience and her vast network of resources. She's excited to be part of the Atlanta community, and we're excited to have you
Yes,
here.
we are.
It's been great. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, and now you're on Atlanta Legal Experts Radio.
I know, and it's a lot more intimidating than you might think.
Get out of here.
We'll just have a great conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did you start in law? What made you start practicing law?
Well, it's interesting when sorry in advance, I just got over bronchitis. So when I started practicing, there weren't the proliferation of grad schools hadn't happened, and so there was law, business, and med school, pretty much, and business wasn't something I was interested in at the time, and in fact, I went to law school to either do entertainment or child advocacy, very much in line with what Joy does. And in law school, I discovered business law and fell in love with it, and used my experience before law school in healthcare to pivot into business, and then with the dot-com boom, really started focusing on technology based on my pre-law experience with computer programming and the like.
So you fell into it, sounds like.
I did. I guess I fell into it, but it's been, and that's why I sort of look at 2010 as a pivotal year, because I spent about 5 years practicing part-time and doing a lot of other things. I had a few companies and a few ventures and creative ventures as well. And in 2010, I was sitting at a client's house in LA on a Saturday writing terms of service for a fitness website that was launching. And I realized I was as happy doing that as I was doing any of these other things, and decided to really focus 100% on law, and it's been great.
So you have what do you really focus on for your law practice?
So that's a great question, and it's a little bit tricky, because I say I'm a business lawyer with an emphasis on intellectual property. So I have a wide range of clients, from consumer electronics firms to software developers to agencies that create products or digital as well as virtual, as well as physical products for other people, for their clients. What I do for them all is the same. I do contracts. I do formation issues. I do joint ventures when my clients are working with other partners. I do a lot of strategic advice based on where my clients' goals are and what their objectives are. Because sometimes if you start down the road with legal services and you do a one-off and you don't think about what's next or what the exit is, you can miss out, or you can make missteps that you then have to go back and correct.
I think it's so important to have an attorney to really look at those fine details, because I know when people are starting their own business, they're not thinking about that because they're so passionate about what they do. And then you mentioned contracts. I mean, that is so important. I mean, if it's not written down, it doesn't hold water.
Right. Well, there are some, you can actually enforce oral and non-formal, non-written agreements if all the pieces are there. But what my biggest concern is people often sign contracts where they don't understand them. What looks like English, and my colleagues can totally relate to this, what looks like English to Craig or Emily is actually a foreign language called legalese.
Yeah.
And
that was my next question.
She read your mouth.
Yeah.
She's good.
Thanks. But there are words that are in contracts, for example, that have one meaning when you use them among non-lawyers and then outside the legal system. But within the legal system, they have a totally different meaning. And I can share an example.
That would be good.
So there's two standards of care that we normally put into contracts. You have the good faith duty, or you have the reasonable duty. And the good faith, I like to say, it's a subjective standard. So it's really based on what, Michael's good faith is. It might be different than my good faith. And my good faith may be sitting on the couch thinking about something, where Michael's might be going out and actually doing it. So it doesn't look like a bad thing in a contract, but reasonable actually is what you want, which in most cases, depending on what side of the contract you're on, because it's an objective standard, and it's the reasonable duty of care that can be defined by a court, can be defined by lawyers in a mediation, because it can be defined. Best efforts is another one that's in with the good faith category when you see that in a contract. So a lot of times when you're reading a contract and you're not a lawyer, even, as a lawyer, sometimes I have to really research a clause of a contract
Right.
To make sure that I understand it well enough to explain to my clients. So that's what legalese is.
So it sounds like context and contextually, it's very important to understand and define. When you talked about writing it down, if you're going to write it, that's why legal documents are so extensive, because you have to define what is that context for the individuals who are involved, sounds like.
Craig, that's a great way of looking at it. I actually say contracts tell a story. And they have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah.
And Joy, I bet you do this all the time. Sorry, I'm bringing other people in because they're sitting here.
We're a family. It's a team.
Is in family law, unfortunately, there are many times you have to think about the end, even when things are going well.
That's true.
And it's hard to get people to understand that. And a lot of times that's what a contract really is about. It's not as much about the good times as it is about what happens when things don't work out the way that you would think they're going to.
I have a crazy story. We have, for one of our services, our contract is a very simple service, but because it almost tells a story, like you said, we've had to add page after page over the years because of what our intent was in the beginning compared to what people see on the paper. And it's sad, but then one prospect said, this is too long, I'm not going to sign this. And I was just like, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you, and then proceeded to write her own. And wanted us to go with that, and I was just
sorry. That was my eye roll that just got done. That didn't get caught on.
They weren't an attorney, were they?
No.
Interesting.
Right. Well, that's also sometimes the hard thing is that one of the challenges that lawyers face now, and I think actually consumers face, is the idea that what I call the do-it-yourself culture, and I think there's a need for do-it-yourself for certain things, but then you need to be very careful, because if your risk of loss is fairly great in a deal, let's say, you don't want to do it yourself, because if you don't do it properly, and if you don't protect yourself, and if you don't have the right clauses in there, or if you agree to something, you could end up holding a great deal of liability. I was going to say holding the bag, but so people should be cautious, even with a lot of the resources that are available. Unfortunately, Emily, you and I've talked about this some. I've had to help quite a few people who have used some of the quasi-do-it-yourself with attorneys, even services that are out there, deal with pretty important trademark matters that weren't handled correctly from the get-go. Because my practice includes trademark as part of what I do, so I help people with branding and registering their marks, and then enforcing both in the United States and internationally. So I think that's a really interesting thing, that someone it's not the first time I've encountered that, where a non-lawyer's written their own contract. Going back to what you were saying about having to go back and revisit your contracts from time to time, I mean, I call them living and breathing documents.
Yes.
Because until you have a contract out there, when I draft a contract for a client, I say, go and use it and come back to me and tell me what people, and I tell them, like, here's what I expect to happen. I expect people to push back on the following provisions. And here's what you can sort of budge on, and here's what you can't. And then once you get their first comments back, we can see how it takes. Because the approach I take to drafting agreements is very different than most lawyers.
How's that?
Which is, I don't want to see it again. I want to do it. I want to do it once for my clients, so that it doesn't have to be negotiated each time. Which is sort of antithetical to the practice of law, and I've actually had lawyers ask me how I make money. But I'm more concerned with my clients making money and not having. I'm just one line item on my clients' budget.
And not all the time, constantly needing you. Well, and that's what happened with these contracts. I mean, we were getting stung, because something wasn't on there. It was intended, and everybody knew it in the beginning, but then when it came down to it, buddy, that wasn't the case. So
I think I subscribe to great attorneys have big hearts, because you have to have so much consideration, and that's for all the parties involved. I mean, you're considering regulatory compliance issues, you're considering the people who are involved, and you have to consider yourself as well.
Right.
But, I mean, that's what I say. As far as intellectual properties, what are some of the obvious things that people miss?
That's a great question.
Thanks.
Wow. Some of the obvious things that people miss is the amount of intellectual property that they're creating. We think of intellectual property generally starts with patents, which are for inventions, useful objects, things like, I'm sure my coffee cup company that I have has some patents on this product. Patents cover useful objects. If you don't protect them, if you don't get a registration on them from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, you actually have no rights. It has to be issued. You have to go through that process. But copyright and trademark are a little bit different. So copyright applies to we call them artistic works, but it's really everything. This radio show is protected by copyright. If it qualifies as a work that can be protected by copyright, it would be applied. The name of the show is a trademark. So trademarks identify the source of goods and services, and a trademark can be anything from the name of a department store that I'm looking at outside the window to the design of their star. That's their logo. That if you see that star, you just sort of think, oh, that department store. AL Radio, AL Atlanta Legal Experts, that's a trademark. With copyright and trademark in the United States, you actually get rights without registering them if they qualify as a copyright and trademark. So you register your copyright with the Library of Congress. You get extra benefits. You can take people to federal court. You can do all these things. But even if you haven't registered your copyright and it is copyright protected, you have rights. Same with trademarks. Trademarks, there are a lot of reasons to register your trademark, get it registered with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, but there are also some times where you don't need to do that and you get rights that you can enforce. And we can talk about that in another show.
Sure. Well, I was just going to say, when do you think is a good time to copyright or trademark your logo? And tell me a little bit about the logo, and then we'll close up.
Okay. So with trademark, the way I advise clients to go through the process with clearing, what we call clearing the trademark, so making sure that you can use it in the method that you want, that you can have the rights that you want in it. It depends on your use. So if I'm starting a local bookstore, let's say, and I come up with a name of my business, that's great. And I continue down that path. But let's say I'm starting an online bookstore that I want to be a national brand, then I would want to clear that mark earlier than later.
Sure.
If I am manufacturing a good, I want to make sure I have all the rights before I go to manufacturing.
Gotcha.
Because there's nothing worse than going and manufacturing, getting a product out on the market, and getting a cease and desist letter from somebody, and having to not just change the mark, but also pull the product and destroy it.
And you may have to start all over.
And you do have to start all over. And with a digital product or a digital project, that process isn't as painful because it's, you go and change it and you do that. But when you have physical goods, it can be devastating. So you really want to consider it early, but what I would advise you to do may depend on what you're doing.
Sure. It sounds like you're very thorough, and I know that I am the worst at doing contracts, like just reading them and, making sure I've got everything in there. So I always have like 2 or 3 people, look at what I've done. But you're very thorough, and so you're really good at what you do.
Thanks.
She's great at what she does.
Thank you.
She's got a big heart.
She can't say it, though.
I did. I just said it. Based upon my subscription, as I shared with you earlier, what I subscribe to as far as great attorneys having big hearts, and we've had a lot of them in here.
Yeah.
You've got a good eye for that.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
If you will let the listeners know how they can reach you.
I can.
Good question, isn't it?
It is. My website is pragerlaw.us, and my mom's going to kill me, but it's P as in puppy, R-A, G as in girl, E-R, law, L-A-W.us. And
You're on social media?
I'm on social media at Prager Law on Twitter, which is not very active, but at Nancy Prager is a little bit more active. And I'm on LinkedIn at Nancy Prager. As far as I know, there are a few Nancy Pragers out there, but I am the only lawyer, Nancy Prager.
In Atlanta.
I heard that.
And also the only one. There's like 5 of us around the country.
Well, thank you again for being here this
Thank you
morning.
for the opportunity. This was fun.
Good, I'm glad. So I just want to make sure our listeners know that we are listening to Atlanta Legal Experts Radio, and our sponsors today are 3A Law Practice Management and at Peachtree Offices and John Marshall Law School. And you can see all their links on atlantalegaleexperts.com.
And the probusinesschannel.com.
And the Pro Business
Yeah.
Channel. Thank you.
You can check those guys out.
Yes.
They're pretty cool.
Yes. And you can also sign up to be a guest as well
Certainly.
on either of those websites. So we're excited to be here this morning. Thank you, Craig, for your support.
Here to serve.
And next we have Michael Bixson. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for visiting us this morning with your
for having me.
expertise. Michael Bixson is originally from Orlando, Florida. He graduated from the University of Central Florida with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and later on from Barry University, where he obtained his law degree. After graduating law school and passing the Georgia Bar, Mr. Bixson worked for the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Association and then Reynolds Law Group, where he went on to become a senior associate before opening his practice in 2012. Since founding Bixson Law, Mr. Bixson has helped clients charged with criminal offenses ranging from disorderly conduct to trafficking thousands of pounds of marijuana. Mr. Bixson is a member of the Georgia Trial Law Association, the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, and a graduate of the Bill Daniel Trial Program. So why did you choose law?
You know, it's funny. I always sort of wanted to do law, but I wanted to do a very different area of law when I first started. Originally, I wanted to do contract work, like Nancy here.
That's funny, yeah.
Yeah, I know. And when I first started practicing, that was all I was going to do, 100%. I wasn't even going to step in a courtroom. And when I was working for the first law firm that I worked for, that changed very quickly. I realized I just wasn't very happy doing a lot of the civil work. And I was just sort of thrown a criminal case, and that sort of led me into the criminal field. And after that one case, I was just hooked.
Okay.
I couldn't do anything else but that. So I sort of always wanted to do law. Ever since I was a little kid, I had the wrong focus in my head.
Sure,
and it wasn't
sure.
until I started practicing that I really realized my passion was for criminal defense.
And you like to be in the courtroom.
Oh, I mean, I live there. if I'm not in the courtroom, I'm usually at home. That's about it. I mean, I spend very little time in my office.
So tell me, let's talk more on the criminal defense side. What type of clients do you have? What kind of cases do you see?
You know, most people, when they think of criminal defense work, they think of Tony Soprano. You know, they think that's going to be your main client. And the majority of the people that walk in my door, you walk down the street, and I guarantee you, 1 in 3 people could at some point be my client. Mm-hmm. Most of them are ordinary people who made a mistake or who were wrongly accused of something. Very few of the cases that I see are some type of, Tony Soprano case, using the example again. Most of them are just ordinary people, but in terms of the type of case that I handle, again, it can be anything from a low-level misdemeanor, disorderly conduct, simple battery, simple assault, to, trafficking marijuana or cocaine. And when you're talking a case like that, you're talking usually pounds, tens of pounds, hundreds, thousands of pounds, to rape, murder. I mean, very serious charges. Mm-hmm. And it's when something like that happens that you sort of don't even realize how big of a role the law can play into your life until you're sort of in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the trafficking of marijuana is not a simple mistake?
Generally, no. I mean, at that point, you're beyond a simple mistake.
Especially thousands of pounds.
Oops, yeah.
So that, it sounds like you really, you just have an array of different cases that you work with.
Yeah, as long as it's criminal defense, I'll handle it. Anything in that bracket. Once you get outside of the criminal field, I wouldn't touch it. I refer to another attorney. But as long as it's criminal defense, that's my passion. It's what I enjoy. So
if you are pulled over and they want to search your vehicle, mm-hmm. do you let them?
No. The short answer is no. I would almost never recommend that you let a police officer search your vehicle. You have a Fourth Amendment right, and it's your shield that protects you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very important right that you should always take advantage of. for me, my biggest fear would be unintended consequences. I let somebody drive my car. Someone gets in my car, and I don't know about you, but I don't commonly search people who get in my car. A friend, acquaintance, family member, whatever it is. It just doesn't usually happen, right? And I don't know what they have on them.
That's a good point.
And let's say you're pulled over for speeding, and all of a sudden an officer wants to search. You say yes. Next thing you know, he finds something on somebody else in your car, and you can be charged with that. And it happens a lot. One of the most common types of cases I see, especially with drugs, is one person in the car had something on them. Nobody admits to who it is. Officer charges everyone in the car. Here you are. Now you need a criminal defense attorney just because you had no idea what Joe in your back seat had on him.
Sure.
So I always say never let the police search your vehicle.
That brings up a good question. With Lyft and Uber, if you're one of those types of drivers, isn't that interesting? I mean, you're taking total strangers. Is it best to protect yourself by recording? Do you have anything on you or something like that? If you are pulled over, or how would they?
Realistically, if you're a taxi driver, a Lyft, Uber, something like that, I think that you would have a little bit better defense that lack of knowledge that your passenger had something on them, and that's a big part of it. If they're going to claim that you had a firearm or drugs or something like that on you, they're obviously going to claim that you knew that it was on the person. That's what the police are going to claim. But if you're just picking someone up for a ride, and that's your business, I think it's a little different. Unless you're claiming that you're their official, consigliere driver or something. I mean,
most definitely. I hope I didn't give anybody any ideas.
So when can they search your vehicle?
There are very limited circumstances in which case the police can search you. The biggest one is, of course, you give consent. You say, they pull you over and they ask if they can search, and you say yes. Well, they're going to search your vehicle. The next one is
mine.
Or can you change your mind right after you say yes?
That gets tricky. Some courts will say yes and some will say no, right? It entirely depends on the situation. And a lot of these depend on the situation as well, right? Especially when you're talking about consent and changing your mind and things like that. When you're talking, and again, this even differs state to state, Georgia is very almost bipolar in terms of how they treat criminal defense. And you will see the Georgia Court of Appeals, especially the Georgia Court of Appeals, sort of flip-flop on a lot of these major issues. And it can go both ways anytime. And it brings up a lot of interesting challenges when you're trying to litigate these cases, because both the defense and the prosecution on the same exact set of facts are going to have great arguments. Because that's what's been given to you by the higher courts. Yeah.
And the law is written, so it is a contextual thing, again, like we talked about earlier. Not like contract, but it is a contextual thing where you have to really know the law, and being an attorney is very important.
I mean, the law is, many times, even if it's written in black and white, it's very gray. And when you combine that with, every fact scenario is so different, when you put the two of them together, I mean, there's almost an unlimited set of possibilities in terms of possible defenses and possible types of cases that you're going to have. So even though, you look down and you see the letters in black and white, I will tell you from very personal experience, it is extremely gray. A lot of the areas of criminal defense. But in terms of what you're asking, when can the police search you? You have consent. Another one is, of course, the officer finds probable cause. And we hear that term a lot, probable cause. When, what does it really mean? It's basically if the officer is able to find some facts or evidence that would lead, a reasonable person to believe that that the suspect's committed a crime, you have probable cause. The most common example that you'll see, especially with the car situation and drugs, is the officer pulls you over and says that he smells marijuana. And I will tell you, that is by far the most common way for an officer to search your vehicle. If they say they smell marijuana, stop right there, they can search your vehicle. Even if they don't find marijuana, if they find something else, that's still in, which is, crazy, because they originally say it can smell marijuana. Let's say they find a firearm or a different drug, still in under the courts of Georgia, which is a little strange when you think about it, but...
I laughed because I watch Cops. I love watching Cops. It's so silly, but I do.
But you never have any of them in here.
That's true. That's true. I'm actually working on that, But this one show that I never forget this. the guy that got pulled over opened his window, and the smoke just came. It was what was worse than that, and what was really funny was that he kept denying it, and then he wrote the ticket, and he was talking to him, and just while he's talking to him, I mean, the smoke just keeps coming out, and I'm like, is there one burning in there?
Clearly what happened was he was a mobile DJ. He had the smoke generator going on. Exactly. I mean, that's not his fault that he wanted to set the party while he's driving.
Oh, it was too funny. But that's what you said, that if they smell it, that's what reminded me of that.
That's why you say no.
Right.
Can't search.
Just say
I know you smell it.
And then you just say no.
Clean your nose
too.
I mean, even if they say they don't smell it, they're still going to ask to search if they think something's going on. Sometimes even if they don't think, maybe just harass you.
And that's the thing with DUI tests. I mean, it's really up to their discretion what they think. So they could, you could walk that line just as straight as can be, but say you're pigeon-toed, and then they think that you're under the influence.
Yeah, I mean, DUI tests are sort of an animal of its own. They are, in my opinion, they're designed to fail you, right? And you have three main types. You have field sobriety exams where you walk the line, stand on one leg, horizontal gaze nystagmus. That's one where your eyes follow the finger or the pen. You have an alka-sensor, which just basically tests positive or negative for alcohol in your breath. And then you have the intoxilizer, 5 or 9,000, depending on the model, and that actually gives a printout, a reading of the amount of blood alcohol content in your body, depending upon a breath sample that you give the machine. Field sobriety exams, the first of those three, are extremely inaccurate. The horizontal gaze nystagmus, the one where your eyes follow the finger, is the most accurate of the three, and even that's only 75% correct.
So what are they saying, that if you're under the influence, your eyes don't follow the finger? Or what is I've always wondered that.
Yeah, so the HGN, horizontal gaze nystagmus, the way it works is the officer makes you follow an object, usually a finger or a pen or something on a light, and what they do is they move it from side to side of your face, and what they're looking for is what's called nystagmus. Nystagmus is sort of it's an eye twitch, and depending on when that eye twitch happens, the officer sort of makes a determination as to how intoxicated you are.
Oh, that does sound very inaccurate.
Yeah, and what's weird about that is that being the most accurate of the three field sobriety exams, you can't see it on a video. I mean, if I see a DUI video of an officer pulling you over, I can see you walk a line. I can see you stand on one leg. I can't see your eyes on the video.
Yeah.
I mean, I never have. So, when we're in court and I have a motion filed, a suppression, or maybe we're at trial, I have to, it's hard to say other than what the officer said as to how, you saw the eyes, because you just can't see it on video, unlike the other tests. And that's supposedly the most accurate of the three. So, it's a very disconcerting thing to me that you just have to take them at their word for it. You never really know.
Some of the people listening, you talked about earlier, that may have a criminal case that they did not. They literally just fell into, and they're innocent. Can you ever have your criminal record expunged?
This, by far, is the most common question I get. People call me and they say, 30 years ago, I pled guilty to this felony. Can it come off my record? And, the answer is no. There's no amount of time. You could spend 50 years and it will still be on your record. The only way to get it off is basically to have, the governor pardon you, and that doesn't happen too often.
We see that all the time.
Yeah, right? There are ways to keep it off your record and to be able to restrict that record. In Georgia, we don't have expungements. We have what's called a record restriction. And there's ways to do that. But once you've pled guilty, and if you don't do it under something like first offender or something like that, it's stuck there. It won't come off for both felonies and misdemeanors. And the most common one you get is DUI.
Sure.
You say, what if I plead guilty to a DUI? Sticks. It's on there for life. So,
thank you for that. What is the Georgia First Offender Act?
This I get in conjunction with the other question. How can I get my record expunged? If you still have a case pending, right? In limited circumstances, you might be eligible for this, and it's a statewide program put into place. And what it does is it basically allows you to plead guilty to a crime, and instead of the judge slamming down the gavel and saying, I find you guilty, they put your case on pause. They say, we are going to withhold adjudication. We're going to see how you do on the sentence that I give you, whether it's probation, whether it's prison. And depending on how you do on that sentence, if you do okay, you don't mess up, you don't get arrested, you don't violate the terms of the agreement, we can actually dismiss the case against you. So, let's say you get charged for something like aggravated assault, just using it as an example, and to further the example, a plea agreement of 5 years maybe, okay? At the end of the 5 years, if you successfully completed probation, you can, basically the case would be dismissed. And that's great.
It's still on your record, though.
No, it's not on the record.
Now it's not on your record.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So, I mean, what happens, and while you're on first offender probation, even though you've pled guilty to it, you haven't been convicted of a crime.
Gotcha.
So if I plead guilty to aggravated assault under first offender, and I go for a job interview, and they say, have you ever been convicted of a crime? I'm on probation.
Yeah.
But I still have not been convicted of a crime.
So you say no.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you've been arrested, but
Sure.
you haven't been convicted of anything. And I think it's a very important distinction. When you're talking for things like immigration, it can still hurt you. But for day-to-day life, I mean, it's very important to be able to say you've never been convicted of a crime.
We've had a lot of criminal defense attorneys on here, and not a lot of criminals. But a lot of criminal defense attorneys.
Only one of them I remember having a history, and he's written a book. And
Oh, that's true.
We're excited about him. 'Cause there's probably a
movie coming up.
Yeah.
But nobody's ever discussed that First Offender Act. I think that's really helpful for people
It's
listening.
a really, I mean, several states have their own version of it. It's hard when I have a client who comes from out of state and, they pled guilty to a felony that here in Georgia, they might have been eligible for a first offender, and they didn't have that in their state. So now they come here, they have one felony, it's on their record, and it's a shame because, it makes them basically not eligible for a lot of other things that they could have been if they'd pled guilty to that crime in Georgia under the Georgia First Offender Act.
Sure.
But, just not every state has it.
Well, I appreciate your knowledge this morning. I'm rushing
It's
it in.
timeless.
Yeah, I know.
It's timeless.
If you'll let our listeners know how they can reach you.
Sure. You can reach me. You can find me on my website. It's at bixonlaw.com. That's B as in boy, IXON, law.com. My email address is just my name. It's michaelbixon@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook at Bixon Law.
Awesome. It's BIXON.
That's right. B as in
Bixon.
boy. Everyone thinks D or N. It's B
Yeah.
as in boy.
Yeah, I can see that.
Bixon. I can hear him on radio. He's got a voice for it, too.
He does.
So Bixon.
Yeah.
Changing
And a
careers.
face for it.
No, just staying long. Staying long.
So thanks again. And
you.
to our listeners, you're listening to Atlanta Legal Experts Radio, and you can find all of the guests' bio and full information on the website,
the show notes.
AtlantaLegalExperts.com. Yes, and last but not least, and thank you for being patient this morning.
No problem. Lots of interesting information today.
Absolutely. And I have Joy Farrell. Attorney Joy Farrell is the managing attorney of the Farrell firm. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science and criminal justice from Georgia Southern University. Attorney Farrell received her law degree from the highly ranked University of Georgia School of Law.
Go Dogs.
She has worked in several different legal capacities, including but not limited to working at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office in the Crimes Against Women and Children Unit, the Federal Defender's Office in the Trial Unit, Assistant Solicitor, City of Lithonia, as well as other family law associate positions in Metro Atlanta. With a huge passion for the love of others, Attorney Farrell believes strongly in fairness and quality representation, as well as honesty and integrity within the legal system, which is probably really hard to uphold.
Not for me.
Not for you, but yet to fight for these people.
Yeah.
The Farrell firm has been built on those foundational principles and is based on the belief that our clients' needs are of the utmost importance.
They are.
So how did you get started in law?
Well, I was one of those late bloomers who decided they wanted to become an attorney. I never had the dream as a child saying, I want to be a lawyer. I entered college not thinking about law whatsoever. It actually wasn't until the end of my sophomore year in undergrad that I actually decided that I would go into law, and that decision was made based on a lot of prayer and focus on where I felt like I could make a difference and be passionate about a particular area as far as my career went. So at that point, I immediately started researching, how do you get into law school? How do you become a lawyer? I didn't know any lawyers whatsoever. So
So it wasn't handed down from generation?
It was not. It was google.com, how to be a lawyer. And I basically, realized I had to take these tests and apply to law school, and it happened very quickly for me. And when I went into law school, I thought I would be like Michael here and doing a lot of criminal. As you read my bio, there's a lot of criminal experience on there. I took a lot of criminal classes in law school. I thought I would do criminal defense, which I did starting out, but shortly thereafter I switched over to the family law side.
I'm sure doing some of the criminal, you got a taste of the family.
Oh yes, they merge very closely.
I hate to say that, but
actually,
it's the truth. It happens a lot.
They're closely related for a lot of different charges, and sometimes. Back then, my criminal clients had family issues. Now my family clients have criminal issues. But just like Michael, I refer those cases out now. I really try to just stick to my expertise at this point.
Yeah, that's good to stick with exactly what you know, because then you can do a really good quality job for your clients.
Makes your life a lot easier when you don't have to research everything. You can answer a question. You can be confident every single time and stand firm on your positions.
So you say, I may not be able to help you, but I know a great attorney who can.
Absolutely.
For the criminal side or whatnot.
There's a lot of areas of law. I think we took the bar on, 27 areas in Georgia or something. I mean, you can't be an expert in all of them.
Sure.
You can try, but malpractice will be knocking on your door.
Now, okay, so we'll talk more about the family law, of course. Tell me, what legal rights does a father have to a child born out of wedlock?
The short answer is none. A lot of people think that just because they parent children together, that once that child is born, mom and dad have equal rights. But the law is very, very clear here in Georgia. If you are not married, that means even if you're engaged, if you have not gotten legally married and you have a child with a woman, you will not have any rights whatsoever to that child until you petition the court. And the process that a father would have to take would be a legitimation process. The hospitals in recent years have started putting a little paragraph at the bottom of some of the birth certificates that says, I legitimate the child. But even then, signing that doesn't necessarily give you the rights that you're looking for. Because when you actually petition the Superior Court for legitimation, you're saying, hey, I want to be acknowledged as the legal father. I want to establish some form of custody rights. And a lot of people say, well, what's the point of that? I'm, me and my child's mother, we have a great relationship. We get along great. We've always operated totally fine without the court intervention. What benefit does a legitimation have for me or my family? And the first answer I always give was, it benefits your child.
Exactly.
Because if a father were to pass away with an illegitimate child, our laws in Georgia would consider that child non-existent. And so if you had something, in a estate, and you die without a will, your child would just be looked over, and that's not really fair. So my first answer is always, well, it's beneficial for your child to be a legal heir to your estate, to anything that you have. And sometimes you may have nothing today, but 10 years from now, you may have built something, whether it's a business or won the lottery, and you don't want your child to be left untaken care of if something happens to you. So that's always my first answer. And my second answer is always, well, you want to have rights, because if mom decides to go get married and she decides to move to California, she changes her mind, you want to have something in place that entitles you to a relationship with your child.
Do you have a lot of cases where you defend the father?
Yes, we're about 50-50, probably, but it usually comes in. The call usually goes, hey, I'm paying child support. She won't let me see my child. This isn't fair. And I always have to say, just because you pay child support doesn't give you rights to your child. Child support is just looking for a biological connection, DNA connection. A legitimation is actually a legal title, a legal right. So you could be subject to that support regardless.
Well, I understand why you get that call, because fair is your middle name.
That's right.
The fair law, I mean, what's the name?
Farrell, yeah.
Yeah. So,
I always said if I ran for judge, I would say, like, the judge that's fair or something like that.
so speaking to that, are marital assets and debts always divided 50-50 in Georgia?
No, they're not, and that's a common misconception that people have. You'll hear bitter spouses saying, I'm going to take half of everything you've got, or, and you'll hear some people saying it's cheaper to keep her. And
I've never heard that.
You've never heard that?
Where have you been?
In a hole.
Well, Georgia, we're an equitable division state, not an equal division state. So some states, I think, like California, they do 50-50, but here is equitable, and equitable in Georgia means whatever the judge thinks is fair. So that could be 90-10, 60-40, 20-80. It just all depends on the factors of your case. So it's very erroneous to come into a divorce thinking that you're automatically entitled to half of something. And even those who believe that they're entitled to half, they often only think half of the assets. Okay, so a lot of times in a marriage, you develop assets and debts. So if you're just going to walk away with assets, you're highly mistaken, because you're going to take some of the debts as well. And so the court is basically going to do an overview and look at what we call a marital balance sheet. And what we do is basically look at the entire estate, like you have the properties that you own, the vehicles, retirement accounts, bank accounts, savings accounts, debts, credit card, debts, all of that, your income, anything that goes into your marital balance sheet, and basically divide it one way or another. And your behavior can affect that. The way you acted during the marriage, your future potential, those things could change. We just resolved the case this week. Our client had over $1 million estate, and his wife walked away with $20,000. So, obviously you would hope for more than that on the other side of the case, but sometimes it just doesn't work that way.
Go ahead.
And so what if you don't want a divorce? How does that work if the other party does? I mean, and what kind of state is Georgia when it comes to that?
Okay, so that's also a very common question, especially for the party who doesn't want the divorce. A lot of times you'll talk to a client and they'll say, my spouse said they're not going to sign anything and they're not going to let me get divorced. Well, in Georgia, it takes two people to get married. Both of you consent to get married, but if you want to get divorced, it only takes one. It does not matter if they don't sign a document. They don't have to show up for a thing. We just have to meet the legal elements of giving them notice of the divorce. And I will just, highly advise that if you get served divorce papers, ignoring it is not the way to go.
Gotcha.
Because then if you're not there, there's no one there to advocate for your side. And the judge is they only have one side to hear.
So if they both agree, do you have to go to court, or,
So
how does that work?
if both parties agree, so we have what we call uncontested divorces, and then there's contested. And most of them are contested. Uncontested means we have a full agreement on everything. That means we're not going to argue about anything. We know exactly how we want to split the house, split the kids, split the dog, split the debts. Okay?
You don't need an attorney for that.
I always say you need an attorney, because if you do your settlement agreement wrong, if you divide your assets wrong, there could be tax consequences all down the line. So you should always have an attorney, and I'm sure all these attorneys here agree. Anytime you're doing something through the legal system, especially when you're dividing something like a marriage, even if it's 1 year or 30 years.
Can you share that attorney since you both agree?
Okay. We're going to walk the tightrope of ethics when we do that. If that happens, what the parties should do is consult an attorney, one party, and the attorney should explain very clearly to the other party that, hey, I'm representing husband here, okay? You should feel free to go and seek counsel to review what we have discussed here. What we have is a settlement agreement. So if you do have a full settlement agreement, you actually, in most counties, never have to step foot in the courtroom. We file what we call motion for judgment on the pleadings, and we just submit it to the court. Judge signs off on it and approves it. Some smaller counties like Rockdale, they won't allow that. They actually want to see the parties actually come in and say, we have a settlement agreement, we agree to this. It takes 5 minutes, but it's done. But going the settlement route is definitely the most cost-effective way to go for any divorce, and it's the most effective way to go as far as emotions, because anytime you put somebody on the stand, the attorneys, we're going to bring out all the stuff you told us in the consultation about what she did, what he did, because we have to build our case, and it's not necessarily good to end your marriage throwing mud.
Sure. Is that more often than not, or do you mostly do settlements? Or does it just totally vary?
You know, we always start with trying to settle, but there's some people in the world who really just want their day in court, and they want to be heard. And when that's the case, it's our job to let them be heard. I always say, though, and every judge just about in the state will say this before they hear a divorce case, you guys might want to step out one more time and try to resolve this, because I don't know you. The judge, they're going to make a decision about how you're going to spend the rest of your life, how your children are going to spend time with their parents. They don't know you from the next person in this room, and the best person to make a decision about you and your kids is you. Okay? Gotcha. And when you choose not to settle and you choose not to work with your spouse to come up with agreements, you're going to have a judge who honestly could care less telling you how you're going to live the next 18 years.
Yeah, like we said in the beginning, start with the end in mind.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I guess everybody here does that for their clients, for sure, because everybody wants things right away, and they're very instant, especially in the world today, especially in this nation. It's just everything's drive-through, everything's quick,
immediate gratification.
Yeah.
It is. And a big thing in divorce especially is being reasonable and not necessarily living in the moment. Like, I've had the biggest kickbacks that some people don't like. When they get divorced, they have young children, like babies. A lot of the times, my moms don't want to let dad have the baby because the baby's too young. They don't believe that a man can feed a baby or change a baby, and then we get into this visitation schedule where the dad just has a couple of hours here and there, or just one weekend, and then we turn around and the kid's 4 or 5 and mom is worn out. And she's like, Dad needs to be having him longer time. But you can't modify Dad's visitation time. He has to decide he wants to do that. And so you have to think for the long run. Yeah, you have a baby now, but he's fully capable of taking care of him and taking on that responsibility. If you put it on him, you just have to think forward.
You do a lot of counseling, I'm sure.
I used to do a lot more, but now I say, well, you may want to go pay a counselor for this.
So what types of custody do we have here in the state of Georgia?
Essentially, we have 2 types. We have legal, and then we have the physical type. So on the legal side, you have joint custody or sole, and then physical, you either have joint physical or the other one parent has primary. Both of those 2 elements must be met. So typically, we have joint legal custody and mom has primary physical. What that would mean is that we have the exact same legal rights. I have equal access to school records, medical records. I can do everything that you can do legally, but then physically, the child resides with you usually 80% of the time, and does visitation with the other parent. If there's a joint physical custody, that usually means the child goes back and forth between the parents approximately 50% of the time, roughly.
So like every other weekend, or?
Well, 50-50 maybe every other week. It could be a 552 plan where the kid is with one parent for 5 days, and then it just keeps switching off and on. Some people do 6 months. For people who live far apart, I'll have the first 6 months of the year and then the second 6 months of the year. That depends on the age of the child, if that would work. But what the court is always going to look at, and anytime determining custody, is going to be what's in the best interest of the child.
Gotcha.
Some judges don't like suitcase children, meaning they always live out of the suitcase, and they're going to want
stability.
They don't want stability.
Does it ever depend on the child support and how that's paid?
Does the custody depend on child support? No, never.
Okay.
But your parenting time can decrease or increase your child support obligation.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your
You're welcome.
legalese today.
I like that. Legalese.
It's not a legal word, though.
English.
If you will let our listeners know how they can reach you.
Yes, well, you can reach us on the phone at 678-585-4428. You can reach us on our website at ferrellfirm.com. That's F as in Frank, AIRELL firm.com. We're on Instagram at Ferrell Firm. That's at Ferrell Firm. We're Twitter at Ferrell Firm LLC, and Facebook is facebook.com/The Ferrell Firm.
Which fair is their middle name?
Yes.
Yes.
That's how you remember how you spell it.
That's it.
Yes, because a lot of people think it's like Will Ferrell.
F-A-R. Yeah.
Yes, fair, like the word fair. That's a great way.
That's it.
The fair attorney.
Yeah, my fair lady. That's right.
We could keep going.
But we won't.
Thank you so much for tuning in this morning. My name's Emily Rowell with Atlanta Legal Experts and with Peachtree Offices. Again, you can go to atlantalegaleexperts.com for all of our past shows, and look forward to being here next week.
Yeah. John Marshall Law, too.
Yes.
John Marshall.
Thank you again for joining Emily Rowell and her guests on the Pro Business Channel. Use the social media links here to share today's show, and stay tuned for the next episode of Atlanta Legal Experts Radio.